Quit India movement was a milestone in the annals of the freedom struggle and the freedom movements of India. Unlike the non-cooperation and the civil disobedience movement, the Quit India movement was a direct precursor to the independence of 1947 that India received from the British. It actually brought India to the doors of freedom because Quit India movement pushed the Britishers to provide these Indians the much needed freedom that they had struggled for a long time. Now, in order to understand what exactly went behind the Quit India movement and what caused the Quit India movement to directly affect the Indian independence of 1947, we will have to look at some of the events and the precursor causes that gave a push to the Indian movement, which is called the Quit India movement. At this point of time, the world was under a lot of turmoil, and especially Britain was going through the Second World War in 1942. We see that Japan had attacked Britain and was simultaneously moving forward and taking various portions of British colonies in the South Asian zones. So we see that the Britishers are at this moment, in a vulnerable state because they could understand the impending danger that Japan had brought ahead in the Second World War. Now, the Britishers had already faced quite a defeat at the hands of the Japanese army, and at this moment the British army and the British government was not ready to lose in the Second World War, and India was its very important colony which was supporting it not only in terms of resources but also in terms of military aid. At this moment in 1942, when the world was on the verge of a larger battle in the Second World War, we see that the British government declares India to be a belligerent state. What that would mean is that when India was declared to be a belligerent state, it had to automatically support the British in its war efforts no matter what, and the Indians and the Indian military per se did not have a choice to choose whether they wanted to fight from the side of the British or not. So India was not even asked for its permission to participate in the war, and India as a colony was taken in the war by the British government. So we see that Indian troops were sent to Singapore and Middle East to fight on the British side without even asking for their permission. So automatically at that point of time, the political parties and the legislative assemblies in India that comprised of the Indian fighters, freedom fighters who were working towards the freedom of India, they were absolutely angry with the fact that the British did not even consider to spare a thought about the Indian masses, or rather the Indian military. So it was not a choice that India was given. So we see that Congress ardently opposed this and demanded the government to pass a resolution declaring India as an independent nation. So this was the point of time when India announced the fact that if India was not given a dominion status of an independent state, it would not take part in the war effort from the side of the British. The then Viceroy, who was Linlithgow, stated that India would be granted dominion status after the war ended. So after the Second World War ended, Linlithgow stated that only after the war would end, India would be given a dominion status. Now, if you take a deeper look at this particular sentence or at this particular sort of statement that the Viceroy made, it will be clear to you that this particular aspect of delaying the dominion status by the British was in fact very strategically placed, because the British aimed at postponing the independence of India, postponing the shift of power from the hands of the British government to the interim government in India. Now, this statement automatically angered the masses, angered the parties in India, and it led to the feeling of deep discontentment among the Congress leaders, and disgusted Congress ministries in the provinces resigned. So, in defiance of the Viceroy's statement and stating their protest, the Congress ministries, who were in fact given some power of governance in the provinces, they resigned from the particular provinces that they had their powers in. But interesting is the fact here that when the Congress ministries resigned, the Muslim League in fact rejoiced this particular fact, and they saw this aspect of the resignation of the Congress ministries as in fact an upper hand that they had being close to the British government. So we see that the Muslim League rejoiced their resignation as it gave them a lease of life. During the early 1940s, Britain was fearful of a Nazi occupation. Now, who were the Nazis? The Nazis were the German forces who were fighting from the opposite front during the Second World War. So, the British therefore needed the willing support of India. The Congress committee offered to cooperate, but on the terms that India's demand for independence was to be granted and transfer of authority to be done to the interim government. So an interim government, a government, was to be formed within the Indian landmass, within the Indian subcontinent, which would have Indians in the government, and also this government would be given the authority to govern India at the earliest. And at that very moment, India also pressed, the Congress committee also pressed for its demand for independence to be granted immediately if Britain would ask for help from India in its war efforts. So we see that the government in response declared the August offer. Now this August offer was passed on 8th of August 1940. Now this August offer in fact came as a reply to the demands of the Indians. What we do need to focus on is what exactly were the clauses in August offer. First, the proposals of the August offer was that after war, a representative Indian body was to be set up to frame the Constitution of India. The first fact was that India would be, given certain powers, and India would have a constituent assembly, and that would be sort of a representative Indian body, which would ideally move towards making the Constitution of India. Second, the existing Viceroy's Executive Council was to be expanded to include Indian leaders. So you can see that the points are to appeal the Indian leaders and Indian masses. So the Viceroy's Executive Council, which did not have Indians, would be expanded to take in the Indian leaders. And the government assured to give full weightage to the opinion of the Indian ministries. Then we see that a war advisory council would include a representative from both British India and Indian states. So you can understand that all these war councils or all these, in fact, committees that were at one point of time set up by the British did not have clear Indian representation. So the British at this moment, when they were facing a deadlock with the Indian colony, wanted to appease the Indians and therefore establish these proposals in the August offer. The next proposal of the British government was that the British government would not transfer power to any government system whose authority is directly denied by large and powerful elements in the Indian national life. Large and powerful elements like the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. So what does this point mean? This means that if the Indian National Congress was to form a government and the Muslim League opposed it, then the British government would not transfer power and vice versa. So we see that the Congress rejected the August offer, and as we are in fact looking towards why the August offer failed or why the August offer was rejected, we come to the forefront with certain points that Congress made sure to spell out to the British who were making these offers to India. So it demanded for complete independence from the imperial power. So the Congress was not ready to, agree to anything other than complete independence or Purna Swaraj, not even dominion status anymore. So it was not, that they wanted India to have a say. They wanted India to have a sovereign say where no imperial power was to, in fact, intervene. Now, this was also the point of time when August offer was made. It became very clear, in fact, we were discussing the last point, that the last point stated that, a power would not be given to a party or a government system which was opposed by certain larger elements in the Indian national life. Now, this, of course, still idealized the concept of divide and rule on the lines of communal divide between the Hindus and the Muslims. So, we see that, in fact, Gandhi also saw this offer as a declaration. Gandhi pointed out this declaration was a means to widen the gulf between the Congress and the Muslim League, as looking at it as a party, as a party that was on one side oriented towards Hindus, which was thought to be Congress, and the other was, of course, Muslim League, which comprised of Muslims and only thought about their welfare. So ideally, the August offer was not to bind the parties together or to give the dominion status. It was, in fact, aimed at increase this gulf between them. So we see that the Muslim League also rejected the August offer that was given by the British. Now, it is interesting to note that both the Congress as well as the Muslim League rejected the August offer. But the grounds on which the Muslim League rejected this particular offer was different from the Congress, because the Muslim League suggested or noted that there was no assurance given to them in this particular offer regarding the establishment of an independent homeland for the Muslim community, which was the idea of Pakistan. So they stated, the Muslim League stated, that the idea of Pakistan was not clearly brought to the forefront, and that is why the Muslim League ideally did not support the August offer, and we see therefore that both the major parties in India rejected the August offer that was brought ahead by the British. When Japan entered the war from the Axis side in 1941 in the Second World War, the British, Russia and the Allied powers were very fearful about the fact that Japan would soon move ahead and try to invade various portions that were under them. And, truthfully so, at that point of time, Japan quickly moved towards the eastern frontier and it lay very close to India. Now, the British were fearful of the fact that if the Japanese invaded India, they came into India, that the Indian masses might just move on to the side of the Japanese and might support the Japanese army. And in that case, British then would be in a dire state during the war. Now, in order to maintain their superiority, Britain wanted to somehow or the other end the deadlock that occurred in India. At this point of time, when India wanted dominion status, India in fact wanted Purna Swaraj, we see that the British government at the doorstep of India trying its level best to break that deadlock. The then Prime Minister of Britain, Winston Churchill, brought ahead the Cripps Mission. So he brought ahead Sir Stafford Cripps, and he sent in March 1942 the Cripps Mission to India. So this Cripps Mission was sent by Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of Britain, and Sir Stafford Cripps was a member of the British War Cabinet. So this War Cabinet was formed for the Second World War to deal with the war issues that were coming up. So Sir Stafford Cripps was sent to India to break this particular deadlock with a proposal which came to be known as the Cripps Mission. Now, what were the proposals of the Cripps Mission of 1942? The first proposal that was given to India was that of the much needed dominion status. So, interestingly, it was stated that the dominion status would be given to India after the Second World War. After the Second World War ends, India would receive the dominion status. It was also given the power to form a particular constituent assembly to frame the constitution of India once the war was over. So India could only take its own decision and decide for itself and form a constituent assembly after the war ends. Third was that the members of the Constituent Assembly would include elected members of provincial states and nominated members of princely states. So, from princely states, only those members who are being nominated by the British would come and join this Constituent Assembly. Other than that, from the provincial states, members would be elected to the Assembly. The last point was the provision of secession, the provision to secede, to a province or a princely state was given as well in this particular mission. So it was stated that a provision of secession to provincial and princely states who did not want to be a part of the Indian Union could decide to do so. So ideally what the British stated, what the Cripps Mission stated was, if anybody wanted to move out of, if any province or any princely state wanted to move out of the Indian Union, it could do so. So you can understand the fact that Cripps Mission, or the idea of the Cripps Mission, was such that it was in fact trying to delay the giving of independence to India, whether it was a dominion status or complete independence. Now we also see that it stated a protection was to be provided to racial and religious minorities. So, it was ambiguous in the sense there was a sort of ambiguity whether what exactly it considered to be a religious minority or in what terms would the protection be given. Viceroy's powers were to remain intact and he was vested with the responsibility of defense of the country. Now, the defense powers or the main military powers still rested in the hands of the Viceroy. Why so? Because of the very fact so that the Viceroy would still have the leash of control and ultimately the control would be in the hands of the British Crown and in turn the British government. This military control was also important for the British because it was in the midst of Second World War. So we see that the British would retain control of defense of India till the new constitution was framed, which would only be after the World War ended. Thus, you can very well understand that this particular mission that was sent to India, the Cripps Mission, ideally focused on the aspects of, only giving these pointers to India or only making false promises that would come true only after the war ends. In fact, Cripps Mission failed for certain reasons. And the very first reason, as even pointed out by Gandhi, was that every clause that was mentioned by the Cripps Mission had a tail end to it which stated that after the war ends. So Gandhi and the Congress did not like the fact that all the clauses had after the war ends attached to them, which would ideally mean that these clauses were in fact, had a sense of ambiguousness to them, because ultimately it might or might not come true after the war ends, and who knows what steps the Britishers would take after that. So the Congress refused to accept dominion status, as it had declared Purna Swaraj, or complete independence, to be its primary goal in 1929. Now, if you remember, while we were discussing the civil disobedience movement, the non-cooperation movement, that already the idea of complete independence or Purna Swaraj was in the forefront of Indian freedom struggle. So a party that has already established its, goal to be complete independence, if you hand them a half-hearted idea of independence that was just dominion status, then it is very clear that the party is going to refuse it. So Congress did the same thing when it stated that Cripps Mission only looked like a window dressing of independence. In fact, Gandhi stated that it was a post dated check that would, we don't know, that the date is put on the check, but we don't know when the date would come, and there is no particular time and day when the check will be received by India. So this independence that was proposed by the Cripps Mission and the independence, complete independence, Purna Swaraj, that congressmen, Indians were envisioning, was very, very different at this point of time. So we also see that Congress stated, the fact that this constituent assembly that was to be formed should have elected members from the princely states and not nominated members. So it stated that like the provincial states, the princely states should also be required to elect and not nominate their representatives to the constituent assembly. So it opposed the idea of a nomination from the princely states. The Congress saw the provision of secession as a blueprint of the partition. So it became very clear with the Cripps Mission that when Cripps Mission constantly supported the ideas of a communal India, of an India that was divided by various communal identities, and it was in fact fanning those communal identities, the Congress clearly understood the intention of the British government, clearly understood the intention of Cripps Mission when it gave the clause that the princely states or the provinces were allowed to choose if they wanted to secede from the Indian Union. So ideally, the breakup of Indian Union was something that they looked to, and that the Congress opposed. So as you can see, this is the old logo, or the very first commonly used logo of the INC, which was the Indian National Congress. Now, at this point of time, we are already aware of the fact that both the parties, Congress as well as Muslim League, were in the forefront of the Indian struggle, the freedom struggle. But it is also clear at this point of time that Muslim League also decided to reject this particular offer. The Cripps Mission, the clauses that the Cripps Mission formulated. So the Muslim League did not accept the mission, since there was again no clear provision of creating a separate country. So like the August offer, Cripps Mission also did not state or did not talk about the clear idea of Pakistan. So they had declared their demand for Pakistan quite explicitly by then. In fact, by then we see that Muhammad Ali Jinnah was already in the forefront with the idea of Pakistan, with the idea of a separate nation for the Muslims. And whereas every offer that Britishers were giving to the Indians did not include creation of Pakistan in their clauses. Therefore, the Muslim League decided to sort of reject that particular mission. Now, this is the All India Muslim League's logo, which later also becomes, in fact, the flag of Pakistan. So we see that Cripps Mission faced an inevitable failure because, of course, both the mass structured parties, that is Congress and Muslim League, they rejected the offer, and therefore Sir Stafford Cripps was also sent back to Britain. But at this point of time, it seemed that it was not just the Britishers who were, vulnerable or fearful at this point of time about the Japanese attacks. It was in fact the Congress and the Indians who were also tensed about what would happen if the Japanese decide to take over India. And this entire problem could only be solved, even what Gandhi stated, if the British decided to leave India, to quit India as a colony, and therefore Japan then would not proceed towards India, because at this point of time the Japanese were already in the eastern frontiers of India and was knocking at its door. So the Congress feared a Japanese attack in India if the British were not made to leave. So Gandhi decided to launch a movement calling upon the British to quit India. So Gandhi stated the very fact that if the British did not agree with the passing of the resolution of Quit India, then a mass movement would begin. Now we see here that both Gandhi and Nehru in this entire map, when marked in blue is the portion that is already in war, and if you see here, Japan is very, very close to India. Japanese ships are almost very close to eastern borders of India. So when British did not agree to this particular resolution of quitting the colony of India, the Indian masses moved ahead and Gandhi gave a call for a nationwide movement. So we see that in July 1942 session, Congress adopted the Quit India resolution, and finally on 8th of August 1942, this resolution was passed when, the Indian masses were expected to come together, form together, come in front, and move towards the mass movement that would make the British to quit India. So you can see in this picture that Gandhi, Maulana Azad, Sarojini Naidu and other important leaders were all present in the July 1942 session of the Congress that adopted the Quit India resolution. This is also the session where Gandhi gave his famous speech that moved the masses to join the movement, and this made Quit India the largest movement formed till then as a mass movement in India, where Gandhi gave the slogan of do or die. So he said, either we bring India to her freedom or die in the process. And therefore the idea of the slogan of do or die emerged and became a mantra for the Indians in this very particular struggle. So can you tell me, when did the Congress adopt the Quit India resolution? Was it in 1939, 1942, 1941 or 1940? The answer will be 1942. Now, till then, whichever proposal was being brought in front of the Britishers took their own time to come up with a reply and answer. But immediately when the Quit India resolution was passed as an appeal to the masses for the mass movement against the Britishers were quite quick to reply. So we see that on August 9th, 1942, the Britishers issued an arrest warrant against all of these freedom fighters, and Gandhi, along with several Congress Working Committee leaders, was arrested. All India Congress and the provincial Congress committees were declared unlawful organizations, because at this point of time the British wanted to still clamp down on India, because India was at this point of time rising in rebellion in the form of a mass movement. Now, when Gandhi and the Congress leaders, the important Congress leaders, were taken to jail, they were arrested, the mass movement lost its leaders. So there were no, important leaders to lead the movement in a non-violent way, as was supported by Gandhi or idealized by Gandhi. So immediately after the arrest of Gandhi and the other leaders, we see that the movement becomes violent and takes a violent turn. So after the arrest of Mahatma Gandhi and other Congress leaders, a peaceful Quit India movement turned violent. So this was, this therefore became the juncture, we could say, when Quit India transgressed that position of non-violence and moved into a violent protest, where we see essentially young people coming forward, as well as socialist leaders coming to the forefront and bringing out the revolutionary spirit that involved militant activities against the British officials, and that became, the radical methodologies became a way of protest that was included in the Quit India mass movement. And therefore, we see that the revolutionary activities are on the rise as well. So this movement was mainly led by the young socialist leaders as well as the student leaders. So we understand that the British, of course, came up with various repressive measures, and the first thing that the British did was to ban the press. So the British government banned the Indian press and public meetings. Secondly, the British crushed the movement ruthlessly. That was to bring out the repressive measures like that of lathi charges, usage of tear gas, as well as sometimes even resorted to open firing at the crowds which already had turned violent. So the angry mobs were now being tackled by the British with these repressive measures. Now, according to the official estimates, more than 60,000 people were arrested, and in fact, more than 10,000 people were killed, along with 1,630 injured during these clamp down activities and repressive measures taken by the British. The Quit India movement was in fact a failure, but that only happened because of how the nature of the movement had become. The movement had become violent after Gandhi and the other leaders were arrested, and therefore the British decided to in fact clamp down with more repressive measures that were violent in turn, and to cut down the violence that the Indians were creating. Quit India movement as a nationwide movement was also able to garner the international support at this point of time. Now, we see that the Britishers, who were in fact delaying the independence process and the process to hand over the power to the Indians, the power of self-government to the Indians, were now under the international pressure from various important superpowers. So we see that the American President Franklin Roosevelt urged the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to grant India her freedom, which she truly deserved. So at this point of time, when India had been in a long drawn struggle against the British domination, British colonization, we see that the international pressures that were being created on the British government was also a reason why India could move faster towards its independence. In fact, this entire pressure that was created during the point of time when Second World War was in full rage, in fact, helped India to secure the support of the international sphere, the international powers that came forward to support India in its struggle per se. And after we see almost 5 years, India moved towards its independence in 1947. Thus, we can understand that the Quit India movement, in fact, became very important and instrumental in showing the British that the Indians were no longer willing to accept anything apart from complete independence. So the international scene was such, and the support that India had garnered from the international scene was such, that India now only wanted to move towards Purna Swaraj, and that was their final demand, that they wanted to be fulfilled without any delay. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.